Okay, we'll go ahead and get started on this. This video primary focus is the analysis of AlphaAntennas FMJ 80 to 60 meter vertical antennas. And I'm also going to show a way that you can quantify the relative performance of two antennas, as we're going to be comparing the performance of the FMJ to Judy's favorite antenna, the Hextenna. So this data on the FMJ antenna was taken at Bald Eagle State Park on October 25th, 2024. And so what we ultimately want to do is to answer the question, how does the FMJ antenna perform relative to the Hextenna for POTA activations, enabling use of the two antenna inputs of the Kenwood TS590SG to minimize antenna band change adjustments. So my thinking was that we hook up the Hextenna on antenna 1 input to the radio, and then the FMJ on antenna 2, and generally we'll see most of the traffic for POTA is on 20 meters and 40 meters, and we have pretty easy setup practices to set up for 20 meters and 40 meters on the FMJ, or not the FMJ, but the Hextenna antenna. And then thinking we could probably use the FMJ for the other bands. One thing that's going to have to come about is a way to quantify the relative performance of two antennas. So I'm going to show you one way I think you can do it. So taking a look at the two antennas, both are supplied by AlphaAntenna, and here's the link to their website. The Hextenna is a two-element dipole, sits about 5 feet off the ground. It's portable and operates from 2 to 40 meters, and also will do 220 and 440 megahertz with the heavy-duty tripod. We've used this on almost 400 activations. It's very easy to use and set up, and has had very good durability. The antenna in question is AlphaAntennas HF FMJ, and that refers to full metal jacket, which is an indication of the type of container that contains the brains for the antenna, I guess you could call it.
At the front door bell.
And it has a actually, we use the same tripod we do with the Hextenna. It came with the FMJ antenna, and it has a collapsible HF element, the brain can, and then it has a ground radio and a directional radio. And this is portable from 6 meters to 80 meters, so we pick up 80 meters with this antenna. It gives you directional pre-tuned touch-free operations, and optimized for DX and NVIS. Requires no guying and deploys in 5 minutes, and it actually does. It's a very good antenna to deploy. This was the first HF portable antenna that I bought after a lot of research and studying reviews, and been pleased with the performance so far. But now we're going to dig in a little more, understanding how it operates, and see if we can speed things up a little bit on our POTA activations. So a comparison of the two antennas, just some bullet points. The FMJ, the vertical, 80 to 6 meters, no adjustment required when you change bands. It has a vertical element, directional radio, and a ground radio, and a tuner is not required, although it can be used. We use the internal tuners on the TS590SG, and it helps a little bit. And then the Hextenna is 40 meters to 6 meters, so we don't have 80 meters. And what you can do with that is, because the elements are infinitely variable in length, you can adjust the overall length to change the resonant frequency. So you can dial in exactly where you want to be with an antenna analyzer, and put your resonant point wherever you want in the band, depending on what part of the band you want to operate. It's a horizontal dipole. There are no radials, and a tuner is not required. You'll see that as we get into the SWR plots for both of these antennas. So it's a very good antenna, Judy's favorite, and it's going to take some hard convincing for her to agree that the FMJ antenna could be almost as effective as the Hextenna in these non-20 meter and 40 meter bands. So we'll see how that goes. So the thing that faces us is that Mother Nature doesn't give us anything for free. So we have to figure out what do we have to give up to get an extra band and adjustment-free band changes. So we would expect a difference in performance of these two antennas on each individual band. And we'll take a look at a couple of ways to try to gauge what that difference is, and should be interesting. Okay, so if we take a look at two antennas, and we'll be looking at these plots in greater detail. Antenna 1 is the FMJ. Antenna 2 is the Hextenna. And this is, you can see, if you can see, it's over the 40 meter band, and we're going from 7 to 7.3 megahertz. And you can see for the FMJ antenna, the SWR is running just under 2, probably 1.8 or so, 1.9 over the entire band. And then when we look at the Hextenna, it's running a little bit lower in SWR, which is better, starting here at the low end of the band, just above 1.5, comes down here to about a 1.3 or 4 at the minimum, and then continues upwards to just a little bit over 1.5. So you can see how you can easily tune this antenna to get the resonant point, which is right here, exactly where you want it, which would be about in the midpoint of the single sideband section of 40 meters. So just about anybody that has their technician license can look at these two SWR plots and tell you that probably antenna 2 will outperform antenna 1 because it has lower overall SWR over the band. But then the question is, well, how much different is it? How much of an improvement would this one be on the Hextenna, or how much do we have to give up in terms of propagation and power if we use the FMJ? And that's where the dilemma comes in, and that you can't really gauge that just right off the SWR plots. You can kind of see a relative difference, but it's not quantifiable. So I already asked that question. How much better is antenna 2, and what does it get us? So taking a look at a typical shot on the POTA website of traffic on bands. And what we're looking at here is you can select the band that you're interested in, and it will show you how many spots they have on the different bands. And generally during the day, when we do most of our activation, 20 meters and 40 meters are the two high traffic bands, and we're set up very easily to get the Hextenna on those bands and get up and running. And generally what we do is we start on 20, and then we do that by adjusting the elements to the length that I've measured on some preliminary tests. And then when we go to 40, all I have to do is shorten each element on the Hextenna by 4 inches, and then add the 40 meter extension elements, and then we're back up on the air. So it's a pretty quick operation. Sometimes 10 meters, depending on propagation, gets pretty busy. But you can see what we're looking at here. For example, are 20 meter single sideband spots. All the programs, POTA. I've got Blink doorbell arguing with me here. Hide the stations that have quit and look at the display the stations that have also been hunted, and we sort by frequency. So this is kind of the what we look at when we go to a particular band. And what's handy about sorting it on frequency, just as a side note, you can easily roll up through the band going from frequency to frequency to see if you can make those contacts. The other thing we use is this chart. It's from data from the ARRL band plan.
Motion detected in the driveway.
I use the same color code that the ARRL used, where red is a CW, RIDI, and data. For example, you can see here 30 meters. The whole band is CW, RIDI, and data. And then it shows you the single sideband in green, so you can see what range you need to be in. Because there's so many of them, it's hard to remember, particularly when you get into the 17, 15, 12, and 10 and 6. You kind of don't use them that much and don't have good access or memory of the data.
Motion detected at the driveway.
And then on 10 meters, we usually operate 10 meters in this range at 28.3 to 28.5 megahertz. The reason for that is technicians have privileges on phone and CW in that band, and just increases your probability of making contacts. And also, not that we've used it or you use it for POTA, also have the 60 meter channel designations if you need to look at those. The other thing Judy uses quite a bit is this consider operator's frequency guide, so that when she goes to a new band, she can quickly see where she should stay away from. Tries to avoid conflicts with everybody.
Motion detected at the front door bell.
So that's just a tool she uses quite a bit.
Motion detected at the driveway.
Excuse me. And if you look, the data that's being taken for this study is from my Rig Expert AA54. You can see it's referred to as an old Rig Expert, but it still does a pretty good job. It covers the HF bands and most of 6 meters. So that's the instrument I typically use. So this is our first trace at 80 meters. You can see right here is 3.8. Forward probably be up in this range, and this is SWR. You can see we've got pretty good range of SWR under 2. The phase angles kind of goes up and down there. I'm sure that's due to the magic box. Then this is the plot of the resistance, which is red, the reactance, which is green, and then the magnitude of the impedance. And you can see that pretty close, the magnitude of the impedance to 50 ohms is one reason we're getting good performance here. And then this reading is what we're going to be using down the road to quantify the difference between the antennas, and it's return loss. And if you're not familiar with it, basically what it is, it's a measurement of the reflected power coming back from the antenna. It's kind of related to standing wave ratio, but this is a quantifiable value of the percentage of power reflected. So if you're reflecting the power, you're not getting it out the antenna, and the way the math works, you want a high return loss value, meaning that you're getting very little reflection back from the antenna, and most of it is being propagated. So this is a real key thing that we'll get into to understand how we can quantify the difference between the two antennas. And here's 40 meters. This pattern is fairly typical of what we're going to see on the FMJ. You can see for the whole 40 meter band, SWR is under 2. The phase angle is pretty constant through the whole band. Definitely capacitive because we're below 0 on the phase angle. You can see the resistance and the magnitude of the impedance here pretty good at around 50, giving us good SWR. and then the return loss is around 10 dBs. So similar on 20 meters, we're a little higher on SWR, about 2.3. The phase angle's declining a little bit through the band, and the return loss is a little lower than we saw on 40 meters, and that's running about 8 there. So what we'll be doing is we're going to be comparing this return loss and the SWR between the FMJ and the Hextenna. And here we have a similar look at 17 meters. You can see we're running about a 1.7, 1.8 SWR, which is very good. It's very capable to operate this way. And the return loss is just a little over 10. 15 meters, similar in that it has a fairly low SWR through the whole range. This is probably, it looks like about 1.3 and down to about 1.2 through the range. And you can see the return loss increases now we're up at 20 dB and higher as we go through the range, indicating that this has less reflective power than we saw at 17 meters. So we would expect better propagation and power out of the antenna at 15 meters. And then here we are at 12 meters, SWR under 2 at about 1.8, and the return loss running at 10 dB, which is lower than 15, about on par with what we saw on 17. Here's 10 meters, again, very effective low SWR, below 1.5 through the whole band. And the return loss is a little higher. Looks like we're at about 15, 14 dB there. So 10 meters, we'd expect that to perform a little better than we saw on 12 meters. And finally 6 meters, I run out of gas on my analyzer here at about 50, some 54 I think it is megahertz. Here the SWR is higher than we've seen typically on the other bands, but this is about 2.5. So this could still operate very well without a tuner, but if you use the internal tuner, it helps that out quite a bit. And you can see this is the lowest of the return losses that we've seen, and it's probably about 8 dB. So we're going to talk a little bit about return loss, and like I mentioned, the return loss, and this is the website where all of this information comes from if you want to study this and understand it a little better. So basically what it boils down to is that we want a higher return loss. So a large loss on the return echo is good, and if it's we have a smaller return loss, it's bad because that means more energy is coming back from the antenna. So this table here is the measurement of the return loss, what the corresponding standing wave ratio would be, and how much power is going into the antenna and how much is reflected. So you can see here, let's say at 10 dB, that corresponds to a standing wave ratio of 2. Power to the antenna is about 90%, and that means we're getting 10% of the power back in reflection. And then if we go to 20, standing wave ratio of about 1.2, and 99% of the power is going to the antenna, and about 1% is coming back in the reflection. So this graph is just this data plotted as a function of return loss. So return loss is on this axis, and as we go higher and higher in return loss, we get more and more power into the antenna. So this is what we're going to be using to quantify the difference between the antennas. Will be the power into the antenna measured by the return loss. That way we'll be able to get some numbers and not just have a qualitative analysis. We'll actually be able to get a quantitative analysis of the difference on each band. So we'll kind of zip through these on 40 meters. The way I've got this set up, the FMJ antennas on the top, the Hextennas on the bottom, and we're looking at both SWR and return loss for both antennas. And you can see here our SWR was a little under 2, return loss of about 10 dB, which corresponds to 90% of the power going to the antenna. And as a point of reference, one S unit's approximately 6 dBs. And then if you use your S meter on your radio or your power meter. And then you can see here at the minimum, we've got a SWR of about 1.2, it looks like, compared to the 2.5. So at this point here, we're getting about 99% of the power to the antenna, and compared to the 90%. So the ratio of those two could give us a quantitative value of the relative power out between the two antennas. And we'll kind of zip through these so it doesn't get to be too long of a video. We do the same thing here, about 2.4 SWR compared to this typical dipole SWR we're looking at, where we're probably about 1.2 down here. And here we're getting, at the peak, we're getting 99% of the power of the antenna. Here only 84% of it goes to it. Similar results on 17 meters, 20 dB, which is a good number. 99% of the power at resonance is getting to the antenna, whereas through this whole band we're only getting about 90% of the power to the antenna. Still a good number though. 15 meters showing about the same general relationship. But you can see here, if you remember on 15 meters, we were up around 20 dB on the return loss, which is over the width of the band, a little higher than what we have on the Hextenna. So we would expect the FMJ on this band to perform as well, if maybe just a hair better. I think you'd be hard pressed to gauge the difference, but they're going to perform very similarly because of the return loss numbers. 12 meters, back to the typical 99% to the antenna for the Hextenna, 90% on the FMJ. See if I can pause this thing. Okay, I'm back from the phone. So we've got a similar pattern here, 99 to 90%, like I think I mentioned before the phone rang. Go to 10 meters. It's really hot in the range we want to go, so we would expect, well, no, this is the Hextenna. The Hextenna does very well. You can see I've tuned the Hextenna to be resonant in this technician range, and you can see we get a very high SWR and return loss, or low SWR, high return loss where we're trying to operate, which is in that technician band. But even at that, the FMJ is at 95% of power through the whole band. So that looks pretty good. And lastly, we've got 6 meters. Definitely not as well of a performer in terms of return loss as the other bands, but it still would be very usable. And you can see the SWR up here at about 2.5 through the section of the band we can measure. So what I did then after that, I went back over each band and put the percent of radiated power for both the FMJ and the Hextenna, and then calculated the ratio of the FMJ to the Hextenna. So this would be 90 over 99, or 0.91, 84 over 99, 0.85. So what this is kind of saying is that you'd expect, in round numbers, the FMJ to perform at 90% of the level that the Hextenna is, and 85. So it looks like both 20 and 6 are poor performing bands. But on the bands outside of 40 and 20, which we we'll use exclusively with the Hextenna, we're still looking at 90 to 95% of the power from the FMJ antenna that we would expect from the Hextenna. So given the fact that these bands, we don't spend a lot of time on them, and we don't make a lot of contacts on them, we don't work them that hard, or I should say Judy doesn't work them that hard, the FMJ should be a pretty good antenna for these off bands. So all we would have to do, the way we set it up, is we set up the Hextenna and set her up for 20 meters. So she works that generally an hour, hour and a half. And while she's working 20 meters, I can put up the FMJ antenna, and then when she's done with 20, we'll switch to 40, and that's usually when she has a sandwich. Then she gets back on the air, works 40, and then just by switching the antenna selector switch on the radio, she'd be able to go pick up 17, 15, 12, 10, and 6 if she wanted, without me having to adjust antennas. And she normally does this at the end of the activation. So what that means is once she switches off at 20, I can go ahead and tear down the Hextenna and get ready to leave. And then when she actually finishes the activation, all we have is the FMJ antenna to take down, which is about a 5-minute job. So it works out pretty well. So that's, I think, a way you could look at how you could get a quantitative measure of a comparison between the performance of two antennas. Now, if you want to, well, I guess I should go over my conclusions. I think I've already said this, but the FMJ antenna would be acceptable choice for use on 80, and then 17 to 6 meters for routine operation. Contacts critical, Hextenna would be selected and tuned to get the best possible performance. And we did this one time when we were contacted by a ham in Romania that had worked all counties in Pennsylvania, with the exception of one that it was a county or two away from us. So we arranged a contact and a frequency at a particular time for him to get that, and I went ahead and tuned the Hextenna exactly to that frequency that they were going to be operating on, and were successful in getting the contact. So, but I think all that's just part of really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your antennas as you go along. It just makes you a better operator. And if you wanted to get into a little finer detail in evaluating the comparison of the two antennas, you can take a look at the propagation plots. The one here on the left is for a typical dipole antenna. Note that this is with a half wavelength above ground, which is quite a bit higher than the Hextenna is normally deployed. We're only about 5 feet above the ground with the tripod. But you can see, for example, on this side with the FMJ antenna, and this was supplied on the AlphaAntennas website, because of the directional element, you can get gain changes as a function of the location from the antenna. So you may find that if it's directional, if you point it in the direction where you think the most contacts will be, you might be able to close the difference between the FMJ and the Hextenna. Now I think for POTA this doesn't have much significance because for POTA it seems that the contacts are kind of randomly dispersed around your location, so being stronger in one direction may not have a lot of value to you, with the possible exception that if you set up the directional radio so that you're pointing east and we're fairly close to the Atlantic Ocean, you might be able to pick up Europe a little better. But there again, it's not easily quantified, but more just kind of general tendencies. But like I said, this is just something you could take a look at to fine-tune your understanding of the antenna even better. And that's about all I know. So till next time, this is K3SKS, and I'm saying 73. Thank you.